America. Is this the group that wanted to know about the Stephen Decatur house? Oh, well, good. My name is Judge Anthony Burton Hall, and I ran right through Lafayette Square on my way here so I could talk to y'all from my chambers at the Supreme Court. Well, I am just so proud that y'all are here with us in Washington, D.C., and he wanted to know a little bit about the history. Well, we are standing right here in front of the famous Stephen Decatur home. Probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest homes in Washington, D.C. This house was constructed in 1818. Now, you may be saying, well, now, who is Stephen Decatur? Well, that's what I want to tell you. Stephen Decatur was a very well-known Revolutionary War hero. He was one of the youngest men to ever be named to the position of captain in what was then the young U.S. Navy. Well, he had a sterling career throughout the Revolutionary War. And then the War of 1812, he became even more heroic as he led many battles. Now, during that time period is where our story sort of picks up with the history of the Decatur house. You see, during the War of 1812, there was another famous naval commodore that we need to talk about, James Barron. He was the captain of the USS Chesapeake. Now, during the War of 1812, of course, we were fighting the British. There was another ship that was there fighting us, and it was the HMS Leopard. Now, history tells us that the HMS Leopard approached and was fighting, and hardly without any battle at all, Commodore James Barron surrenders his ship. Now, this was very embarrassing to the United States. There was a court held on the deck of the USS Chesapeake where one of the American soldiers were hung and the other two were sentenced to brutally beating. Now, after the War of 1812, there was a court-martial on this particular case. They were trying Commodore James Barron, and they found him guilty of cowardice for not even putting up a fight. He surrendered and surrendered his ship, and he surrendered his men. Now, you may say, now, what does that story have to do with the Decatur house? Well, guess who was one of the judges on the court-martial? That's right, Stephen Decatur, Commodore Stephen Decatur. Well, as James Barron was stripped of all of his medals and his title from being a Commodore, and he was shamed, it took him, he vowed that he was going to get even with all of those people that court-martialed him and shamed him. It took him 5 long years, but he tracked down Commodore Stephen Decatur right here in Washington, D.C. Picture it, the year is 1820. Prominent Stephen Decatur is out, and then he hears someone call his name that he hadn't heard in a long time. And who was it? But James Barron. And he challenged Commodore Stephen Decatur to a duel. So out in the street there was a duel, and as the men stood back to back, as they began to march apart, when they turned to face each other, as was the course during a duel in that day and time, James Barron pointed his gun and he shot right into the abdomen and the stomach of Commodore Decatur. He fell to the ground, bleeding in agonizing pain. The men who were there picked Commodore Stephen Decatur, rushed him back to his house here, where he laid in agonizing pain, up in that very room right there. The story goes that the surgeons and the doctors that were there, they stitched him up 3 times, but they could not contain all of the blood that poured and poured from him. Poor Commodore Decatur suffered for 2 days. The story goes that he cried out in agony. He did not understand how any human man could suffer so much pain. As soon as those words left his lips, life left his body, and he lay dead upon a bed in which he had lain on for 2 days. Sobbing over her broken heart and her grief was his lovely wife, Susan, who had to be sedated and carried to her bedchamber. Now, many people say that this house is a little haunted. Now, you may say, well, okay, how do you know? Well, I can tell you a true story. You see, the house that stands before you now is the Stephen Decatur home, but it is also, today, the home of the African American History Museum. Now, it gives tours every day. People come and go. Thousands of people have been to the Decatur house, and there are many of us who will share this story. You see, with all the gray hair in my head, I came to Washington, D.C. many, many years ago and heard the story of the famous Decatur house and wanted to find out for myself. So I came and I took the tour. As I was walking around through the museum and looking at the house, I began to feel pains in my stomach. I began to feel feverish, like as if I was going to throw up, and I began to grab a hold to the furniture because I just knew that I was going to pass out from the pain. I felt like I was going to throw up, and then I was rushed to the hospital. I was in the hospital for days. The doctors ran all kinds of tests. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. They couldn't figure out why I was throwing up. They couldn't figure out where the pain in my stomach was coming from. They couldn't figure out why I could not feel better. And then, after many days there, it simply went away. When I was home, I was told that there were many others who were in that tour group many years ago who had the same symptoms as I suffered. Now, let me just tell you this. As I began to find out, many others took that tour through this Decatur house and suffered the same consequences. If you were to go to this museum and tour the Decatur house today, there are many that would say nothing would happen to you, and they'd probably be right. But then there are others like me who would tell you different. So I ask you, do you wish to enter and find out for yourself what will happen if you enter the Stephen Decatur house? Will you suffer the Decatur curse? Oh, don't let me scare you. This is just an old story, and you know, with any story, it's mixed with truth and not so much truth. But you'll have to go on the tour to find out for yourself. I thank y'all so much, and I hope you enjoy our beautiful city. And once again, I'm Judge Anthony Burton Hall, and I thank you for coming to the Stephen Decatur house.